Distinguished guests, let us begin the shipbuilding session of World Ocean Forum 2021. We have 6 speakers, and we are presenting this session in a hybrid format. On the website of World Ocean Forum and the YouTube channel, simultaneous interpretation is being provided, and you can post your questions, especially on the official website. You can download the materials for the presentation, and you can post your comment or questions. And let us begin the shipping session of World Ocean Forum 2021 on the theme of 2050 carbon neutral strategy, challenges of smart ships, and green hydrogen technologies. Let me invite the presider of this session, Mr. Kwang Han An of Hyundai Heavy Industries.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I'll be serving as the moderator of the shipbuilding session of the 2021 World Ocean Forum. My name is An Gang-hwan, and thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I would like to thank the speakers and panelists for their time and presence. Also, we do have many participants joining us online and offline. Thank you for your keen interest and participation. With that, I also want to congratulate the opening of the 2021 World Ocean Forum. Now we will begin the shipbuilding session titled The 2050 Carbon Neutrality Era, Smart Shipping and Challenges for Green Hydrogen. Before we begin the presentation session, I would like to briefly introduce and give you the summary of what we are going to present today. Climate change strategies, environment-friendly regulations, and carbon neutrality have become new buzzwords in our society, and as a result, countries around the world are pursuing the development of eco-friendly smart ships and also maximization of the operational efficiencies in response to the Industry 4.0. And at the same time, ICT, AI, and also IoT platforms are also being incorporated in order to develop the platforms for eco-friendly ship development and also the ship management capacity equipped with the state-of-the-art technologies are the imminent challenge that we have to overcome and achieve. And in that sense, during this session, we are going to talk about the 2050 carbon neutral strategies as well as smart shipping and also the green and eco ships. And also, we will also talk about the nuclear power propulsion ships as well as the floating offshore wind power. In this era of decarbonization, what we need to do and where we should head toward. I believe that these are the things that we put a lot of our considerations nowadays. And in this sense, I believe this session will be very informative. So for this, we have the Monica Cardozo, who is the hydrogen alternative fuel expert at DNV GL in Norway, who will give us the keynote presentation, as well as the Yu Byung-yong from Hyundai Heavy Industries and Song Kang-hyun from Korea Register, and the Kim Man-sul, professor of Busan National University, and Bae Jung-cheol President of the Korea Maritime Equipment Research Institute, and also the Vice President Lee Gang-gi of AVL will give us the presentations.
오늘 도전 세션은 먼저 프로테 쉘브르그
But
주요
before we move on to the
선정으로
presentation session,
시작을
we will
하겠습니다.
open this shipbuilding session with the speech by Frode Skjolberg, the Norwegian ambassador to Korea.
안녕하십니까? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me first extend my gratitude for inviting me back to the World Ocean Forum. I was here last year as well, and for me, representing Norway, it is a privilege and an honor to be back and to be allowed to share some perspectives on this important topic. Today, we will discuss the challenges and opportunities of the green energy transition in the maritime sector. Norway is an ocean economy. The history of Norway is a story about the oceans. More than 2/3 of our export revenues come from coastal and ocean-based activities. Fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, as well as energy production. Thus, it is our government's ambition to take a leading role internationally to secure a future where our oceans can provide more of the resources that the world needs, and at the same time as sustainability is secured. The maritime sector plays a key role in this. The world is facing many challenges we must solve together if we are to reach the Sustainable Development Goals and our climate goals. The United Nations Climate Conference is just around the corner, and the latest UN report on climate shows that what's at stake, as has been said, we're at code red. We have to do something. But at the same time, it's still not too late. The best available science is clear. It tells us that large cuts in global emissions are needed fast to reach the temperature target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. We need to do our part nationally. As one of the first countries to do so, Norway submitted our NDCs, enhanced NDCs, in February last year. And we will cut emissions by at least 50% by 2030, aiming towards 55% below 1919 levels. And in 2050, our goal is to be a low-emission society, having reduced our emissions by between 90 and 95% compared to 1990. And since we already had, at that time, a more or less 100% coverage of electricity or green electricity from hydropower, most of our cuts needs to be done by industry and the transportation sector. And this target can only be met if Norway's domestic shipping industry takes its share of the cuts. Thus, we have made commitments to cut emissions from domestic shipping and fisheries by half already from 2030. And what do we do? Well, from 2023, all new ferry tenders will have to set requirements of low or zero emission technologies. Aquaculture and speedboats, leisure boats will face similar requirements later on. And the maritime industry is prepared to take its share of emission reductions, but investment in restructuring is required from both authorities as well as industry. And making greater use of modern energy in shipping, including hydrogen, is part of the answer. If we are to reach our objective of a low-emission society and promote clean and healthy oceans, we must successfully develop, adapt, and implement new technologies in several areas. Emission reductions in shipping can be achieved both through energy efficiency and by using energy from renewable sources and low-emission fuels. Norway's objective is to establish the most efficient and the most green maritime sector in the world. And the change in the maritime sector in Norway is happening fast, as we speak. The cruise ship operator Hurtigruten launched the world's first hybrid electric expedition cruise ship in 2019. And the Norwegian company Havila is also building hybrid ships, but with another type of technology. Their coastal cruise liners will run on LNG and battery power. And the use of LNG will cut carbon emissions by 25%, and the battery package will enable the vessels to sail emission-free from several hours at a time. And the Norwegian ferry company Norled constructed the world's first car ferry sailing on hydrogen, which was delivered earlier this year. And already next year, Norway will have more than 80 all-electric and hybrid ferries, lowering our emissions. And we have found that if we manage to have zero emission in the ferry sector, this will result in an emission reduction of 600,000 tons of CO2 every year. What's more, it can lead the way for hydrogen and other green solutions in long-range shipping. And this change is not happening on its own, but because our government is creating a sound framework for business, supports research and development, and providing the necessary finance needed to support the business development of new green and innovative pilots and technologies. In addition, an important reason that the entire industry is now collaborating on developing green solutions is a general acknowledgement that it will ultimately have no alternative. If they do not take action today, they may face substantial climate and environmental costs in the near future due to regulation and higher fees. They can be sure that they will be able to get good freight rates for their ships. The value of their ships will then drop dramatically, just like it did for diesel cars in Norway after Norway introduced substantial incentives for emission-free cars. Our government firmly believes that by making it cheaper to be green and more expensive to pollute, we are creating a competitive advantage for our industries, because they will lead on green technology in the future. Progressive environmental policies offer great opportunities not only for growing industries, but also for jobs and economic growth in general. And I also want to emphasize that the green transition needs to include everyone. A global transition to zero-emission shipping should include assistance to developing countries, and Norway is supporting this through the IMO program, Green Voyage 2050, and we also welcome others on board. Dear friends, I have shared with you some of the opportunities that we have, and some of the challenges, and also some of the technologies that will shape our future, and also the increased ambitions of the Norwegian government. And our common challenge, whether we're industrials, representatives of governments, diplomats, is to combat climate change and make sure that we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And I believe that the Republic of Korea and Norway will have great benefits in working together to enhance our efforts to achieve a sustainable and green maritime sector through political leadership, innovation, and close cooperation. And as I have said on many occasions before, as perhaps the two leading maritime nations with our strong history, our strong platform of cooperation, if the Republic of Korea and Norway, if we can't make it, who will then be able to do so? So that's a strong encouragement for us to do something together. And I look forward to having a close dialogue on these topics, and I wish you a very successful session and discussion. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Prodes Helbergus. 첫 번째 우리 조선 세션을 위해서
So for this shipbuilding session, Ambassador gave us a very good speech. Why don't you give another round of applause to him?
다음은 지금부터는 오늘 주제인
Now, we will start the main part of the shipbuilding session, which is the presentation session. And the first presentation will be delivered by Monica Alvarez Cardozo, hydrogen and alternative fuels expert at DNV Maritime. And the topic of her presentation is challenges and opportunities for the 2050 carbon neutrality in the era of global transformation.
I will talk about hydrogen as ship fuel. I will present the challenges, the opportunities, and also what we need to do to make this, especially green hydrogen, a reality in shipping. Some of you may have been aware of an accident that we actually experienced in Sandvika, very close to the DNV offices in Norway, where a refueling station that it was actually only 3 years old had a fire and a subsequent explosion. Luckily, there were no fatalities because there were no people in the proximities. However, we got some key learnings out of this accident. It was a leak, actually, the origin of the event, and the leak went undetected for 2.5 hours before it ignited. It was found out later on that 2.5, maximum 3 kilograms of hydrogen leak from one tank. And we got two key learnings. The first one is it is very important with early leak detection to be able to prevent serious events. But also that for hydrogen arrangements, it is critical the parameters such congestion and confinement. Those parameters can be hazards on its own. At a higher level, we of course can conclude that we don't want to transfer these risks on board, and we don't want to take the chances of events like this happening on board. Most of you know that hydrogen hazards are actually related to hydrogen's inherent properties and characteristics. As you can see in the graph, actually hydrogen has a higher explosion potential if we compare it with other alternative fuels that are now kind of available. If we see in the graph, the burning velocity increases, and especially, for concentrations above 15%, we can say that hydrogen's risks and explosion potential and also the detonation potential is higher than other fuels. We are trying to actually transfer technologies from land on board. And one can say like, yeah, but actually hydrogen has been used safely in land for many, many years. And why we cannot use it, or what are the risks? Actually, we can transfer the technologies, but we need to be careful because we cannot transfer all the safety barriers that are used on land. For example, on land, hydrogen is typically handled by either, say, specialists or the ones producing the hydrogen in the facilities, and they are kind of having longer experience with it. On land, it is common also to have a distance from big quantities. Large quantities are separated, especially from public areas, and there are defined large safety zones for that. On board, we know that the arrangements are very compact, and this is difficult. Glass walls are also used to protect from high kind of pressures and explosions, for instance. And on board, we need to optimize the hull and keep the weight as low as possible. It's also advised on land for, especially again, big quantities to put the installations on open air. And if we want a fuel that is competitive with other fuels, we need to have it below deck and in enclosed spaces on board. On board, we have also additional hazards that are specific to the ship application. For instance, collision and grounding, that are risks that if an event, for instance, a collision is affecting a tank with large quantities of hydrogen, then the consequences are beyond the current safety acceptance level for any other, say, ship type or risk on board. We have applications that are actually increasing the frequency and the risks of the events because of the amount of tanks and pipes and connections, for instance, with compressed hydrogen. And also the scaling effects are important. In a car, we have a tank that is typically 5 kilograms of hydrogen. On board, it can be 3,000, 4,000 kilograms, so it is different. We are implementing new solutions, such, for instance, bunkering with containerized swappable solutions that have not been proven with other fuels. We have also, I mean, unlike LNG and ammonia that have been used for decades in transportation, in shipping, we are, I mean, totally new to hydrogen when it comes to the maritime application. And the crew competence, we are not sure we will achieve at the level that is actually needed if we follow the current kind of level of training for the crews. Price is another challenge, as we know. In DNV, we have our energy transition outlook that was published this year, and actually the outlook is saying that hydrogen will achieve a cost that is competitive only in 2045. So if we compare with other technologies such solar and wind that are almost reaching a relatively competitive price now, I mean, it is different because those technologies, they were kind of developed and receiving incentives for many, many years or decades. To store hydrogen on board is also a known challenge. The volumetric efficiency of hydrogen is not the same, is not favorable in comparison to other fuels. If we have a tank with liquefied hydrogen, we need 3 times the volume of a tank with LNG, for example. But still, even if we need more volume, we see that the technologies are coming in and there is an increased interest, especially for compressed gas applications, because compressed gas is the fuel that will be available, say, easily. For liquefied hydrogen applications, it's kind of the long-term fuel, but also the interest is increasing quite a lot. So what is the way ahead with hydrogen? We need to actually rethink the safety approach, use effective leak prevention solutions for compressed hydrogen, have a goal of 0 leaks, 0 accidents, and rule out the fire scenarios using safety measures such inerted spaces, for example, use high integrity safety systems, and develop competitive, inherently safe solutions. We need to cooperate and share knowledge. We need to cooperate with industries that have the experience, for instance, aerospace. And also, in general, in the maritime industry, we need to cooperate because we see that, for instance, working in DNV is a kind of a chance to see that the technologies are being developed at the same time in different places around the world. And if kind of people cooperate, then of course we could achieve the tempo that we need. We need to make the transition faster, and for that we need to actually cooperate. We have good tools and instruments when it comes to the regulatory framework, and those tools currently are actually sufficient for the new projects that are being pilots or demonstrators. We have the IGF code that is covering the low flashpoint fuels, including hydrogen, and having a set of goal and functional requirements that are the kind of overall safety levels that we are trying to reach with these new designs. We have already guidelines for fuel cells that are finalized at IMO and waiting for approval. And the tool that is the alternative design, that is an approval process that has been used for designs that are either having a high level of innovation and that do not comply with current prescriptive requirements, or that are not covered by current prescriptive requirements, such as hydrogen fuel. We in Norway are actually lucky to see at the moment several developments around hydrogen as ship fuel. Some are actually cooperating projects and projects that are aiming to also help for standardization and commercialization of the technologies. I would like to mention, for instance, 2 projects funded in the European Union. That is, one is eShips, that is a pre-normative research on hydrogen fuel solutions for passenger ships, so aiming to help into the regulatory development. Another one is HiShip, that is a demonstrator vessel that will run in the coast of Norway and will help not only to demonstrate that hydrogen fuel is feasible, so for that ship, but also to kind of help the development of the supply of hydrogen along the coast in Norway. So it is, and it's a partnership, so it's kind of going beyond the scope of one single unit. There are also two projects worth mentioning in the joint development projects list. One is MarHiSafe, and the other one is Zero Coaster. MarHiSafe is a DNV-led project that aimed to create a handbook for hydrogen fuel vessels. The handbook was actually published just before the summer. It's available online for those that are not aware of it, and it contains kind of the current state of the art of hydrogen safety for maritime applications. The project has a phase 2 that is starting now and has a kind of a big goal. Is basically to work with the current hydrogen knowledge gaps that we have, and also to try to validate the current technologies, evaluate them, and especially work with the safety measures. And at the end, the project is aiming to fit into standardization and rule development. In Norway, we have also the Zero Coaster, that is another joint development program from the green shipping program. So there are several alternatives from the government to kind of support the development. And this one is special as well because the aim is to demonstrate that zero emission fuels can be commercially available at competitive prices. So the way to do it is to explore different solutions, and for instance, modularization is one of those. And they are working, for instance, with compressed hydrogen. So again, we have seen a growing interest. In Norway, the list of new projects is long. In here, I'm showing some that are kind of ahead in the line, probably. Hydra will be the first ferry using liquefied hydrogen. We have also all the projects with compressed hydrogen and also with liquid organic hydrogen carriers. That is a kind of separate storage method that is having a different safety approach, so kind of a better safety level, but however, it has other challenges. So every solution has advantages and disadvantages. We see that these projects are mainly proposed in connection with PEM fuel cells, as PEM fuel cells are the technology that are more developed at the moment among all the fuel cell alternatives. So to summarize and to conclude, I would like to actually make emphasis on the fact that hydrogen safety is on a critical path for the decarbonization of shipping. That we need also more cost-effective, inherently safe designs to allow commercialization and standardization. And also, I mean, finally, we need to cooperate. Industry cooperation is important, and that will be the only way to make a faster transition and to reach the goal that, I mean, we all want to see green hydrogen as a fuel in shipping. Thank you for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mrs. Monica Alvarez Cadroz. 지금
I'd like to express my gratitude to Ms. Monica Alvarez Cardozo for her presentation. So hydrogen will play a pivotal role in decarbonization. She elaborated on the challenges and opportunities as well as the direction we have to pursue going forward. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Byung-Young Yu of KSOE, the EVP of KSOE will deliver his presentation on new marine energy transport for a carbon-neutral society. Good afternoon. I'm Byung-Young Yu of KSOE. Thank you very much. under the theme of carbon neutral strategy, I'd like to talk about ships. What kind of ships we will see down the road. I work at a shipbuilding company, and I love ships. And one anthropologist wrote a book titled Ships, and the title was so great. And this is what I saw on the first image, that he said that the age of ship is over. The ships are dead. I thought that I made a wrong decision to purchase the book, but as I read the book, I came to realize that what he said was very correct and true. He wrote the book back in 1940s, and back in the days, ship was to carry goods or passengers. It was a means of transportation. When we go to Europe or the United States, we use airplane, not vessel. So what he meant is that other than the cruise tourism, the era of ship as a carrier of goods or passengers is over. But I still work for the company, and the company is very prosperous. That it is because now ship is carrying containers, but from now on we will see a new era of ship, which as a energy carrier. But in the day of net zero, there is no way for ships to carry oils or clothes. And what are we gonna do? We talk quite extensively about carbon neutrality and hydrogen, but we have to see two different scenarios here. The first is hydrogen as a cargo to be carried by a vessel, and another scenario is hydrogen as a fuel to run a vessel. So most of the presenters will elaborate on hydrogen as a fuel. That's a carrier B in this case. So the environmental regulations and the operation of a ship itself drive the growth of hydrogen as a fuel, but the energy source, the energy mix is a bigger driver for the development of hydrogen. Ships carry a large amount of cargoes, but now we are moving and transitioning into renewable energy, so that brings about a serious concern. Now, why is hydrogen important? Because new and renewable energy is not stable, so it accounts for only 30% of the energy mix. That is why the remaining 70% requires a CCS, or the energy storage, and energy efficiency is the highest with hydrogen. That is why as we move toward net zero society and hydrogen-based economy, the role of hydrogen will grow even further. So in this case, we will see the increase in the cargo volume. What I can see fortunate is that, well, this is the expectation and the outlook by Clarkson up to 2050. If we take a closer look at this, oil seems to be going down, but the gray section is LNG and LPG. Compared to 2020, well, its volume will grow exponentially. Even in the process of moving towards net zero, it will take such a long time for us to achieve this carbon neutrality, and the energy consumption, the absolute volume itself will grow. That is why the demand for LNG and LPG will grow even further. So we talk about hydrogen and ammonia, but that doesn't mean that the cargo volume will go down, but in the maritime industry, well, this will present a new opportunity, a new type of vessels. There are three different ways to carry hydrogen. The first is liquefied hydrogen, and the second is LHC, or liquid hydrogen energy. And third way to carry hydrogen is to create and generate hydrogen at the point of consumption, but in this case, carbon dioxide will be generated. And to achieve net zero, we should be able to tackle this issue of carbon emission. That is why we have to turn to blue hydrogen. And in this case, we also have to consider how to eliminate carbon emissions. So what are the carriers we can see and we will see for the transportation of new energy and what my group is doing? Well, this is the area I'd like to focus on in the second part of my presentation. As for ammonia, this is technologically accessible. My company ranked first in the world in terms of LPG carrier, unlike LNG carrier. But LNG carrier put LNG into different carriers and different tanks. But as for LPG carrier, well, it has multiple tanks, but each tank would carry a different type of gas and energy. And as for the standard cargo, ammonia is registered. So ammonia is registered as one of the standard cargoes, and we already have LPG carriers which carries ammonia, and we have three different shipbuilders which can build LPG carriers which can also carry ammonia. But so far, ammonia has been just one of the cargoes for the LPG carrier, but if we are really to achieve net zero and with the higher level of cargo volume, then we should to have an ammonia dedicated vessel. That is why my company completed the design as well as the AIP approval in principle for 91,000 cubic meter for ammonia. So once we have ammonia dedicated vessel, then we will have ammonia fueled propulsion vessel. That is why we are working on the development of such a vessel. Next one is hydrogen itself. And the left bottom, this is the image you might have seen quite frequently. This is a liquefied hydrogen test ship produced by Kawasaki. But some foreign media uses this, call this experiment ship. This is not a commercial vessel. It is very long, but the tank itself is very small, so this is not commercially viable. So this is only to see how stably you can run this liquefied hydrogen tank in the sea. And as for GEV, well, this company is specialized in CNG, and they are developing CNG type hydrogen vessel. And in the far right, you can see Hyundai LH2 or liquid hydrogen carrier. This has not been commercialized, but we are working in phases. But this is to prove the safety and stability of liquefied hydrogen. Last year, we obtained the world first approval in principle for a commercial liquefied hydrogen carrier. And earlier this year, in collaboration with the Korean Register, we have been developing the international standard for hydrogen fuel tank as well as the hydrogen handling system. So we have created the system starting from the ship, the standard, and then the system. In order to reduce the concerns in the market, we have carried out various efforts, and why we have been able to successfully soothe the concern is because we have reduced the boil-off rate. Well, liquefied hydrogen has such a high boil-off rate, so it has at least 20 to 30% of the hydrogen cargo loss during voyage. But in order to prevent this, well, the market will believe that you need a high-performing tank. I think this concern is generated from our understanding of the LNG carrier. The LNG carrier has liquefaction facility, and it also has a DF engine. But since most of the large carriers have membrane and liquefaction facilities, well, these facilities would cost you quite a lot. that is why the market believes that this is not commercially feasible. But as for CNG, well, they use high bar tank. In this case, well, there would be virtually no loss. We use a Type C pressure tank, and during the voyage, most of the BOG is kept in the tank, and as for the remaining BOG is used for the engine or fuel cell. We are developing a fuel cell in collaboration with the research center. So this is not just a concept, but this is something we have actually proved. So as for the round trip between Australia and Korea, there has been no BOG loss. So 85% of the BOG is accumulated in the tank, and we use about 15% of the BOG as a fuel. So this much we have successfully reduced the carbon emission. So this will also contribute to the low emission. Another concern in the market is that the storage, the requirement of the infrastructure on land. So extremely low temperature tank for hydrogen might be required, of course. But if the size of the cargo would go exponentially, then we would need such a large infrastructure. But at this time, when we are trying to launch this technology, I think, well, the hydrogen regasification system is more than enough. Well, this is the system which has been available for the LNG up to this point. As you can see in the center, GV, since they carry pressurized gas, well, they claim that they can provide this pressurized gas in multiple places. But as for our LH2 carrier, we carry them without liquid storage, but instead we have hydrogen regasification system enabling distribution to multiple destinations. So this is how the vessel would look like based on all the features I just elaborated on. This is the concept vessel, and we are now seeing this step by step. We are in discussion and conversation with overseas carriers as well. Let me turn to CO2 carrier. As I mentioned previously, CO2 is critical for achieving blue hydrogen, and as for the storage of the carbon dioxide, well, the carrier can carry carbon hydrogen to various parts of the world across the ocean. Coca-Cola and some of the large companies are already using the carbon dioxide carrier, but only for a small volume of the cargo. But going forward, we would need a larger scale CO2 carrier. That is why we obtained AIP for 20,000 cubic meter and 40,000 cubic meter. Not just the ship itself, once the CO2 carrier becomes commercialized, then we would need a carbon dioxide injection offshore platform to keep and store the carbon dioxide in the deep sea. So in line with this net zero effort, we will create and develop and create CO2 injection offshore platform. Not just that, from the point of production, most of the renewable energies are generated through in offshore facilities, but we will create an offshore wind farm. In other words, we are developing as a new product a green hydrogen production offshore platform integrated with offshore wind power. So I shared with you the new product we are formulating and developing with regard to the green ship. Although my discussion and presentation is limited to the ocean, we will cover the entire value chain because the Hyundai Group has various points in the entire supply chain by 2030. So we will continue our efforts to develop hydrogen-related solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in this era of carbon neutrality, as we strive for carbon neutrality, He talked about the efforts in shipping industry, and so I'd like to thank the Yu Byung-yong from Hyundai Heavy Engineering.
오늘은 우리가 그동안 산소균 축제를 맞이하면서
The presentation so
여러
far
가지 논문이
have
나왔다고
talked
하면서
about
산소주기에
various
대해서
challenges and
많은
opportunities and how we can
했었는데
adapt to this goal of carbon
우리가
neutrality.
그동안 듣지 못했던 얘기들을 많이
So
해주셨으니까
I believe that today's presentations are very thought-provoking
그 회사에 대한
and
기준이
very
쉽지는 않을
informative.
것
I believe that
같은데
it's not really easy to observe because Mr. Yu
ENG가
talked about
이제
the technology
ENG를
that
어떻게
Hyundai
사용을
is
하더라도
pursuing,
이를 수준으로 사용할 수 있는지
and he also
또
talked
거기에
about
대한
the
게
way
이제 새로운
to
우리가 했던
how we can
시스템이
utilize
있는지
energy not just for
거기에
transportation but for
산소로서부터
propulsion and other
우리가
purposes,
선진국으로 가는
and also how can we
하고
proceed to
또
the
우리가
carbon
그런
zero
기술을
ammonia
어떻게
and also other alternative fuels.
대단히 감사드립니다. 다음은 세 번째
Next, moving
세션으로
on,
송강현
I would like to invite the third presenter,
소장님께서
Song
IMO
Gang-hyun from Korea
대해서
Register,
경과 자료에
will give
대해서
us the
설명을
presentations
해주시기
on how
바랍니다.
to respond to EEXI and CII. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. IMO has made the GHG regulations very stringent, and also recently they have come up with the EEXI and CII regulations, which could have huge impact on shippers as well as shipbuilders. So I would like to talk about the IMO GHG issues and regulations and how the liners and the shipbuilders can respond. So IMO's goals are very clear, that their vision is to achieve decarbonization within this century. And in order to achieve this vision, they have come up with the targets. So for example, like by 2050, they are going to reduce the GHG emission by 70% for each vessel, and also the GHG reduction by 50% for the entire shipping industry. So this is very, very challenging. And in order to achieve these goals, they have come up with the short-term, mid-term, and long-term measures. And EEXI and CII are the centerpieces of the short-term measures, and the ETS is the centerpiece of the mid-term measure, and zero carbon and fossil fuels are the ones for long-term measures. As you know, the EU has recently adopted the Fit for 55. So aside from the shipping industry, already many other industries, they have pledged to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050. So IMO regulation, when it was first devised, it was criticized that it's too challenging, but in fact, the other industries have shown more aggressive attitudes and approaches. So this means that the IMO is very likely to strengthen its regulation even further. So EEDI is applicable to new builds, but for the existing ships, in other words, the ships that are constructed before 2013, which represent about 70% of the con vessels. So the existing ships, currently they have no regulations, and so it's not really fair. So for existing ships, IMO has come up with the EEXI to set limits for the operation of existing ships. So this is the requirement for energy efficiency, and all of a sudden you can see that the ship owners, they now have new requirements to dramatically increase energy efficiency for existing ships. So in other words, the ships that are constructed before 2013, you can see that now they have very stringent requirements that they have to increase the efficiency dramatically. And also for phase 2 and phase 3 ships, they don't really have to increase efficiency to continue operation. And even if they meet EEX, so if they fail to meet EEXI requirements, then the ships have to be demolished and removed. And even if they fulfill the EEXI requirements, next year they have to again be verified. And if they fail for 3 consecutive years, then the ship owners will receive huge penalty. And the requirements are going to continue to be strengthened. So, for example, like fuel oil based ships, if they receive the rating C, and if they do nothing, then later it's going to be D. But for LNG ships, it will take some time to be downgraded to D. That's why it gives business advantage to the LNG ships. So that's why I think that the IMO has adopted this kind of methodology. And here you can see the timetable. So it was adopted this year, and by 2023, companies are required to, to prove that they fulfill all the requirements. And then the system or the new regulation will enter into force. And after one round of the overall assessment, they're going to readjust the requirements and maybe further strengthen the requirements. So the current CII regulation, especially in European countries, I believe, will be strengthened further. So in order to meet the requirements in EEXI, the most efficient way is to slow down the speed. However, then there are issues with the chartering agreement. So if need be, then energy retrofit or energy saving devices installation can also be utilized as a way. But then it also induces cost burden. So if it's too costly, then sometimes it may be better to demolish the ship if it's too old and less efficient. So we did the monitoring and assessment of the existing ships, and you can see that the even the new builds that are built with the EEDI, as for the bunkers, you can see that 30% failed to fulfill. So only you can see that 80% of the existing ships failed to fulfill. And so in order to meet the requirements, they have to lower down the speed. And if it's within 20%, then it doesn't really have the implications. But if it goes over 30%, then it will start to have huge impact on businesses. In order to improve energy efficiency, various measures can be utilized. One of them is the installation of energy saving devices, and various devices have been developed in um, category A, B, C. So category C is about the recuperation of waste heat. Hyundai Global Service recently announced this data, and you can see that mainly the 3% or 4% energy efficiency improvement effects can be achieved. This shows that no matter how hard businesses struggle, it's very difficult to improve energy efficiency by more than 10%. So EPL can be a way, and if it's not enough, then EPL with the energy saving device. And again, if option 1 and 2 are not available, then LNGTF retrofit can be considered, but it's very, very costly. So we have to think about the academic benefit as well. So if all the three options are not available, then we have to go for option 4, which is a new build. And so you have to think about the capex, opex, remaining service life, as well as the time for engineering installation verification, as well as the cost for the retrofits. That's why we have to devise specific solutions for each ship. So KER has come up with the softwares in order to assess the impacts from EEXI and CII. And now I would like to talk about how to improve CII. EEXI is a kind of the one-off assessment, but the CII is like lifelong assessment. So you have to continuously receive this verification. And you can see that the CDE, which are subject to fines and penalties, they actually represent 80% of the existing ships. So in order to improve CII, you have to have systematic maintenance, and you also have to achieve the optimum operation through the speed optimization, trim optimization, route optimization, as well as the minimization of the and idling of harbor operation. And also lifecycle management based on CII simulation is required. As you know, CII is an operational measure. Here you see that the same ships, A and B, both of them are 1,800 TEU, and their EEDI is almost similar. So in terms of technological performance, they're same. But the A received the C rating, whereas the B received A rating. So the differences lies with the distances. So A had a very high speed, and it traveled a very long distance compared with B. So fuel consumption for A is 500 and B 415. But the fuel consumption at berth, A is 75 and B 16, which means that the B shortened the time for harbor operation. So if you could shorten the time of harbor operation for A, then actually A can receive the rating, B rating. So this means that the optimization of operation is critical to improve CII. So after the disclosure of CII, I think that it's going to impact the shipyard as well. So in the past, so shipyards produce high quality ships and deliver ships. That was their mission. But with the birth of the CII, now they receive new requirements that they have to provide the lifetime assessment management. In other words, they have to provide various kinds of after-sale services in order to have business competitiveness. And again, in the end, the existing ships have to slow down the speed. So I think that this will increase the demand for new builds. So far I have talked about the short-term and mid-term measures. Now let me turn to mid to long-term GHG response measures. Although we make a lot of efforts to improve energy efficiency, but in order to achieve 70 to 80 or 100% energy efficiency improvement, we have to change the fuels. So here you see the Clarkson data table. So the light blue indicates the LNG and the other includes the hydro. So currently we have growing orders for fuel oil, but LNG is going to increase significantly and FO will decline and zero carbon fuel will start to be placed with order in the not too distant future. And as for ammonia and hydrogen, they are not economically viable at all right now. If you just compare the fuel tank, you can see that in terms of the storage efficiency, the hydrogen requires 3 times larger tank than the LNG. And also compared with the FO and LNG, the hydrogen and ammonia, they're very expensive. So they don't really have competitive edge right now. But the IMO market-based data, as well as the EU ETS, which is announced together with the Fit for 55 recently, what they talk about is that they're going to provide incentives if they reduce GHG emissions, and if companies fail to reduce GHG emissions, then they are subject to fines. In other words, if they utilize ammonia or hydrogen and succeed in reducing GHG, then they can enjoy various kinds of subsidies and incentives. And also, even for the route of operations, you can see the various benefits are provided to eco-friendly ships, and also the shippers, they no longer prefer the polluting ships that produce a lot of GHG. So right now, at this time, at this point of time, the ammonia and hydrogen are not economically viable at all, but through the incentives provided by financial institutions as well as the shippers and cargo owners, I believe that these new fuels can have some attractiveness and continue to strengthen their competitive edge. That's what IMO pursues.
수용을 되실 수가 있습니다. 그래서 굉장히 가시성이
And
높은
also
상황이라고 보이고요. So we know we will take everything.
LNG is also welcome as biofuel. So I believe that the winner really takes everything.
하기 위해서는 기술 혁신이 필요하다고
So in order to have this alternative fuel that can take everything, we have to develop technology. And regarding that, I'd like to talk about KR GHG activity. So here you see the org chart and biofuel, synthetic fuel, carbon capture. We are focusing on technological development for these fuels.
아모니아는
And also
LNG
ammonia
굉장히 보편화된 결국에
is going to be widely adopted after LNG.
사용될 거라고
So even for the transportation of hydrogen, ammonia is very likely to be utilized. So I believe the ammonia will soon be established as the common marine fuel and infrastructures are going to be placed. Um, so currently we are conducting various researches on ammonia and again hydrogen. So after ammonia, we will rely on liquefied hydrogen. So engines and fuel cost supply systems are now actively being developed. So hydrogen, or rather ammonia. So ammonia is very likely to be utilized soon. However, when it comes to liquefied hydrogen, technological barrier is still very high. And therefore, for the liquefied hydrogen, we are conducting various research projects, whereas for ammonia, we are conducting various demonstration projects. But if you could take leadership, so we should not lose leadership in hydrogen, and we should not be the latecomer. That's why we are focusing on R&D for hydrogen, and also electric propulsion system is also critical. So we are conducting various activities as well. So IMO regulation is revised heavily recently, and it creates a lot of uncertainty, and also it is likely to be further strengthened. And therefore, the shipyards, shipbuilders, and also the shipliners, they really have to pay attention to how IMO regulation is going to be enforced. And we don't really have one-size-fits-all answer in this question. So maybe we can have the combination of the fuel oil and biofuel, or LNG plus CCS, or green methanol, ethanol, ammonia, fuel cells. So various options are now open and available for us, and we have to establish the framework where we can provide the comprehensive management in order before we find out the most cost-effective solution. So when there is no clear answer, I think this is something that we have to go forward. Thank you.
정말 유익한
Thank you for a very informative presentation. How to respond to the IMO the greenhouse gas regulation. I'd like to thank the presenter, Mr. Kang Hyun-song of Korean Register.
지금 전 세계의 많은 곳들이
Many people around the world, especially in the shipbuilding and the shipping industry,
온라인으로도 참가를
are
하고
joining us virtually.
오늘 사실 발제자 세 분께서 말씀하신 내용들은
What the three presenters shared with us are the topics discussed quite extensively in various fields, but how feasible they are, how probable they are, how well prepared we are,
사업 안에 어떤 영향을
especially what kind of impact it will have on the carriers and shipbuilders.
분께서 말씀하셨던 오펙스와 캐펙스의 관점은
From the perspective of OPEX and CAPEX, as discussed by Kang Hyun-song, I think, well, Mr. Song has shared with us very practical ideas. I believe, well, your presentation will be of great help to those who are in the shipping and shipbuilding industry. Once again, I'd like to thank you for your presentation.
발표를 듣겠습니다.
Let me move on to the fourth presentation.
다음은 이제 네 번째 부산대학교 수소선박기술센터
Next speaker is Professor Man-soo Kim of Hydrogen Ship Technology Center at Busan National University. He will share with us his presentation on the eco-friendly hydrogen ship technology trend and hydrogen economy plan. Please welcome him with a big hand. Distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to be here.
오늘
I'm
제가
Mansu Kim.
알려드릴 내용은
Today, I'd like to talk about trend of eco-friendly hydrogen ship technology and hydrogen economy plan, or plan for hydrogen economy. Some part of my presentation are rather technical, so you might have some difficulties in understanding my presentation. But I believe these technologies might be the core technologies for the hydrogen economy, and those who are in this industry and those who are interested in this subject might find my presentation very interesting, although these technologies have not been fully commercialized yet. So this can show you what we can do going forward. So this is as if looking into the future.
그런 기회가 되지 않을까라는 생각을 좀 해봅니다. 그래서 좀 기술적인 이야기가 될까?
So although my presentation might be a bit too technical, I'd like to ask for your understanding on that matter.
발표하는 순서는
This is the content of my presentation. I will start with alternative fuels for marine application, and I will move on to key technology for hydrogen ship, and this will be followed by hydrogen economy plan, and I will conclude my presentation.
이 내용은 IMO 레귤레이션 이야기인데
This is about IMO regulation. Well, since Korean Register's Director Song elaborated on this matter, so I would be able to skip this slide. One point I'd like to highlight here is that IMO regulation is not an option. This is a must. This is mandatory. So you have no exception whatsoever other than complying with this regulation.
지난 2월 달에
In February this year, there was an IMO alternative fuel symposium virtually because of COVID-19. And there was an intensive discussion on alternative fuel, as you know all too well. Hydrogen, green methanol, green ammonia, biofuel. These four types of fuels were discussed as an alternative fuels. As you can see on the table, well, those four fuels were discussed because we can make a significant carbon dioxide reduction. And with regard to this, nations around the world are researching alternative fuel options, and some of them have already conducted a demonstration. And Norway, France have the flagship project, and Danish company Maersk is piloting with biofuel, and the United States is testing hydrogen fuel and biofuel. And as for Korea, we are testing and developing various next generation fuel options. As for the alternative fuel options, as for biofuel, well, we have some examples such as HVO or FAME, fatty acid methyl ester, but fuel supply infrastructure is not fully established. And as for methanol, well, you can store methanol in room temperature or in the atmospheric temperature, atmospheric pressure. However, you would consume fossil fuel in producing methanol. As for ammonia, well, it has relatively high volume energy density and it is relatively low price and it is almost zero emission. However, it's seriously toxic. So this has a toxicity issue. As for LNG, well, this is like an interim or transitionary fuel, but it is not really zero emission fuel. So these options are available and each option has its own advantages and disadvantages. So if you have put this all together, then you have the basis for producing hydrogen. So we are in a transitioning period to move into the full-fledged hydrogen fuel.
그리고 이거는 이제 하이드로겐 ship에 대해서
This slide shows you the world hydrogen ship technology trends. For demonstration, well, there are various products and projects. So in the far left, this is a hydrogen ship in the German lake. And next to that is a MF Hydra flagship project of Norway. And the next one is Japanese transport vessel, Swiss Frontier. And the next one is a water around of the United States. PAM method was applied. So this is available. And as for H2 port, we can see in the United States and Spain. And in Korea, my university of Busan National University. But this is to build, the plan is to build this vessel by 2026. This uses PAM-FC, and it has the CO2 capture system as well. So this is the plan and which is underway. I'd like to turn to key technology for hydrogen ship. In the far left, you can see the image. With a C-type tank, you can achieve a daily BOR of 0.3% per day. As for this, well, the installation is done using polyurethane foam. So as for the LNG using polyurethane foam, this kind of latent heat, saturated temperature, and the BOR properties can be produced for the 300 millimeter thickness of insulation. If you apply this characteristics into liquefied hydrogen, then the insulation thickness should be 3,300 millimeter. So in this case, this is not viable and this is feasible at all. So this is a very fundamental research that was done. And this is what has been researched by NASA, the United States. If we use liquid hydrogen, then we need to get some help from vacuum system. So we have three different scenarios: low vacuum, mid vacuum, and high vacuum systems. In the far left, we have low vacuum system, and there you can see the vacuum pressure is 1,000 torr. As for vacuum, 1 bar is about 760 torr. And if there is no gravity, then 1 millitorr. And good vacuum cleaner has about 650 torr. Then 1,000 millitorr is about 1 torr. So this is extremely low vacuum, not really low, but anyway. Between the outer hull and inner hull, with spray and form insulation and multi-layer insulation can be introduced, then the conductivity will be about 1 meter W. Then this can be applied into large scale tank. And as for mid vacuum, the pressure is 0.1 to 1,000 millitorr. And the conductivity would be only 1/10 of the low vacuum. And as for filler, glass bubble or aerogel mat can be used as a filler in order to adjust the conductivity or radiant heat shielding. And the last one, high vacuum system. Well, the vacuum pressure would be less than 1.1 millitorr, and the conductivity would go as low as 0.1. So high thermal insulation performance would be fully utilized to ensure conduction and convection heat. So this is suitable for a small-sized storage tank. This is the case of Kawasaki. Well, this was covered already. They are researching this 160 1,000 cubic meter liquid hydrogen carrier. The overall trend is more or less the same with LNG, but the temperature is, this is to see whether they can work properly if the temperature is about 100 degrees Celsius lower. So it has BOG management system and cargo handling system, as well as the cargo containment system. So these are the areas of potential research going forward.
요거 이제 카고 컨테인먼트 시스템도 두 개가 하나는 저쪽에는 일본의 아까
These
제주도
are the cargo containment systems. So one of them is for the Norwegian project. The other one is for the Japanese project. You can see for the Japanese project, it is type C tank, and double steel was used, and a double shell vacuum installation structure was introduced. As for settled grass fibered reinforced plastic was used.
요거는 이제 노르웨이의 IT 테크놀로지가
This was done by a Norwegian IT technology. This is a membrane type. So for CCS, it uses stainless steel. The target is zero boil off. So as for the insulation system, it introduced a double shell vacuum insulation structure and helium circulation cooling system. So these are under the demonstration stage, in demonstration stage or development stage.
좌측에 있는 테이블 보시면은 이거는 뭐
On the left side
드라이잉
table, as you can see, this is the liquid hydrogen carrier cargo operation procedure. It goes through drying, inerting, gas filling, and cooling down. But if you go into details, then slightly different technologies would be incorporated. So if you go through this process, you can see what needs to be done. And there is a re-liquefaction system. And as for the re-liquefaction system, the tank pressure accumulation system should be in place. Then this system should be able to minimize the hydrogen loss. And the emergency system needs to be in place as well, because hydrogen can cause explosions if it is not handled properly. And it also needs and requires loading operation system. And this also needs to include the cargo heater, compressor, transport system, because all the pipes need to be vacuum insulated, and double pipe needs to be implemented for insulation. Last but not least, a gas combustion unit is also required for cargo handling. The next one is BOG handling or BOG management. Just like the LNG, liquefaction is required, but nitrogen is used for LNG. But in case of hydrogen, cold helium would be used for primary cooling. This is for the re-liquefaction. And there should be another type of research required to minimize the energy consumption of the liquefaction system. As for the bowl of gas, this should be able to be utilized for fuel, or it should be able to be recycled. So this is the diagram that captures that idea. I'd like to turn to the hydrogen economy development plan by the Korean government. As for the hydrogen roadmap, the government's goal is to scale up hydrogen production and to establish industry infrastructure and the supply chain, and then to scale up the supply chain of hydrogen. And the government is also aimed at reducing the cost for production plant as well as for storage and transportation, so that mass transportation will become affordable and available. And the last pillar would be to build hydrogen city with hydrogen fuel cell plant with the fully commercialized hydrogen technology throughout the society. So this is a blueprint set forth by the government.
그 하이드로겐 이 차이를 보면은 뭐 LNG의 경우에 그 브레스트 포텐셜, LNG 스토리지를 하고 저기서 스토리지를 하고
So,
저기서
well,
프로덕션을
this is the hydrogen port,
하려면 거기에
how that will look like.
스토리지로 들어가면 물론
So with the LNG carrier, well, this will be transported, this will be stored. As for the LNG, then it goes through the production process. Then in the process, well, we will have hydrogen that will be stored and this will be used. Then it will be supplied to the fuel cell and the cities for the residential consumption. And the various um, sources of hydrogen will be handled to generate hydrogen, and the carbon dioxide will be captured and used for another purpose or will be stored. So this is the roadmap for hydrogen economy for maritime and fisheries. And this is the expanded view of what I just talked about. As for the ocean renewable energy, we have a wind farm, offshore wind farm and onshore wind farm. We have tidal wave related renewable energy generation. With this, but we can generate hydrogen using water electrolysis. And we can use the hydrogen for the fuel as a fuel for the vessels. Let me conclude. If you take a look at the hydrogen energy value chain in the industry, we have the production, storage, and the vessel, the transportation, which represents transportation, and application. All the key technologies need to be scaled up. So this is a summary of my entire presentation. In order to do this, well, there should be verification, eco-friendly considerations, as well as the government policy framework. All these things need to be taken into consideration in its entirety. My university, in order to facilitate the development of the hydrogen industry, will host a forum in Korea in November. I'd like to invite all of you to the forum so that we would have a better understanding and we can embark on an in-depth research into hydrogen ships. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim Manu. He talked about the technological trends as well as the marine hydrogen economy. So as for the propulsion system, I myself have researched for a long time, engaged in this field for a long time, and recently I have conducted a lot of researches on green fuels. But as you know, in fact, the hydrogen platform has become a buzzword, and it has been widely covered by media, and also government has come up with various policies. And listening to Professor Kim Manu's presentation regarding the propulsion ships, the hydrogen platform, and also all the things that are required to build them, as well as the systems and roadmaps and operations, I found that very interesting. And also he talked about how other nations are doing, and he also gave us very detailed descriptions on their plans. So I believe that the Professor Kim's presentation might have been very useful to our online offline participants in understanding what kind of technologies will be required and also what will be the challenges and opportunities. Moving on, we would like to invite the fifth speaker, Mr. Bae-jung President of the Korea Maritime Equipment Research Institute, will give us the presentations on the so-called super gap strategy of maritime equipment for eco ships. Please give him a big hand. Thank you very much. In this era of the smart ships and carbon neutrality, I would like to talk about the strategies that ships must embrace for future. In particular, I would like to talk about the marine equipment to realize our vision of green ships. So my presentation will mainly focus on marine equipment. We had the very technical presentation just before, but I will just give you the overview of what kind of equipment are required and how we can secure technologies in order to achieve the vision of eco-friendly ships. So this is my agenda. I will first begin with why we need to build and develop smart green ships. Then I'm going to talk about some major strategies, mainly in four sectors. As you know, the international regulations have heightened the need to develop low carbon, environment friendly vessels. IMO has come up with the several mandatory requirements recently. And also domestically, Korea has adopted the environment friendly law. So already we do have domestic legislation, and that legislation has been applied already to coastal ships in Korea. So mainly led by public organizations, already the green vessels have been introduced, and I believe that it will have some trickle down to the private sector. And in order to promote eco-ship development, we also have to have the appropriate marine equipment. This slide is created by Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and this indicates the mega project, which is to develop technologies for low carbon ships for entire life cycle. So in order to have low carbon or no carbon ships, we have to develop technologies for fuel, as mentioned by previous speakers, and also for operation, vessel operation. Again, we have to conduct the remote monitoring and assessment. So the smart devices and equipment are required. Up until today, the marine equipment in the past, it only meant the equipment that are mounted on board, but we have to broaden the concept of marine equipment to embrace the ship design as well as the assessment and verification and maintenance of vessels. So we have to broaden our concept and definition of marine equipment. And I believe that you also agree with that. And in order to develop the leading edge marine equipment, technological development is important, but also legislation and establishing legal framework is very important. We also have to take leadership in international standardization so that the equipment that are developed in Korea can dominate the global market and therefore creating the so-called super gap. In order to develop green ships, we have to succeed in energy transition. In other words, from the very phases of energy production to supply and transportation, we have to develop the eco-friendly approach. And even for like the fuel storage on board, and also the fuel supply system for engine. Although the name fuel supply system remains same, but depending on the fuels that are used, In fact, the completely different requirements and equipment are required. And therefore, when we make proposal for a national research project, one thing that's very challenging is that when we suggest the idea of the development of the fuel supply system, then the public officers often think that we already have that, so they don't really select our idea. But in fact, depending on the fuels that we utilize, sometimes we need completely different fuel supply system, which needs to be developed. In order to take leadership in future technologies, we have to create the very wide gap for marine equipment technologies. The reason why I emphasize this is because starting from last year, you see that the order volumes for the shipbuilding starts to be increased starting from last year. So for the next 10 years down the road, shipbuilding industry will be able to maintain the current average volume of order. And when it comes to the marine equipment sector, I believe that we only have 10 years of guaranteed survivor. In other words, when there are orders available, we have to develop and secure future technology so that we can be prepared for future when the order of the shipbuilding decline. So even when Korean shipbuilders fail to take orders and receive orders, we still have to maintain the businesses. And for this, we have to develop cutting edge technology so that we can export our technologies to foreign companies, foreign shipbuilders. So, and also we have to establish some foundation for testing and demonstration. In other words, sometimes we develop very good technology, but then we fail to demonstrate technology, and that could be the stumbling block for commercialization. And so demonstration and verification technology is also required. And as I said earlier, we have to take leadership in setting the international standard so that Korean technology can be adopted as international standard. So as for technologies, I think the previous speakers already covered this. I'm going to skip this. For the hydrogen-fueled ship, I think it was well elaborated by the previous speaker. So as he said, the hydrogen has a very low volume storage efficiency, and it requires a very low temperature storage condition. So it requires a lot of technologies, including pipeline and so on. So each of them is actually about equipment. So we have to pay attention to the development of marine equipment. And in this sense, I hope that the clients, the shipbuilders, should take leadership in developing and fostering equipment technologies so that Korea can enhance its competitiveness in this field. If you look at the examples of the EU, the US, and Japan, they already have their own proprietary technologies, and various demonstrators are already in operation. Korea is somehow slow, but fortunately, the Busan National University does have the plan, so maybe soon we are going to conduct the demonstration test. But what's more important is that the shipbuilders should utilize the domestic technologies for marine equipment as well. So for this technological part, I'm going to skip this. And for ammonia as a fuel for ship, Hyundai Heavy Engineering demonstrates global leadership, and I understand that they also developed the ammonia technology. But I hope that they could also pay heed to developing equipment as well, so that the domestic engines and all the equipment of the vessels can be secured domestically. And when it comes to toxicity, there are a lot of issues to be tackled for ammonia to be used as a fuel. So the treatment equipment and processing equipment, I think, have to be developed. And this is the blended fuel. As you know, the LNG and fuel oil, they're already utilized as DF, and we are. I understand that development is currently underway to produce low carbon blended fuel, and there were a lot of discussions and debates on Co-Marine conference that took place last week. And I believe that by 2030, the hydrogen blended gas turbine is going to be commercially available, which means that we don't really have enough time to develop various equipment that are required for this gas turbine. So we really have to roll up our sleeves and step up our efforts for technological development. Next is about the electric propulsion ship. As you know, in terms of the battery capacity and the charging times, electric propulsion is currently applied first to coastal ships. A lot of coastal ships in Korea are converted into LPG-based ship, but there is also an effort to push forward with the transition to electric propulsion ship. So maybe starting from small scale boats and ships, we can apply electric propulsion system, and later on we can expand that to larger scale vessels. As you know, already in overseas, some vessels do have hybrid system that combine engine and battery. So for marine equipment, the inverter and the electric control module, as well as the superconductivity, high efficient modules. I think this is something that we can also work on. And fortunately for these three, I understand that the Korean company started the technological development already. So soon, I hope that the demonstration project will begin. For emission reduction device, as mentioned by the previous speaker, from 2030, LNG is going to be a basic for all vessels. So it's going to be mainstream. But what's unfortunate is that Korea actually received more than 90% of the LNG carriers order. But when it comes to LNG cargo handling devices such as pumps and compressors, as well as the BOG devices, there is a domestic company that succeeded in development, but they failed to move on to the demonstration phase. So currently, we don't really have domestic technology for this marine equipment. So in order to address these type of problems, currently we are trying to start the demonstration project. So although we are working, I hope that we can have demonstration project soon for about 1 year. So out of 12 months, 9 months are for general operation, and for the remaining 3 months, I'd like to set aside the period for retrofitting. So I hope that we can have ample opportunities for demonstration tests for marine equipment that are developed in Korea. Bunkering equipment is also something that we have to pay attention to. So for LNG, we have the truck to ship and ship to ship technology. But in the future, especially for large vessels, we have to establish the infrastructures that provide terminal to ship solution. And fortunately, the Ulsan and Busan terminal are going to establish terminals for these bunkering vessels, but the progress is very slow. And also for electric propulsion ships, low voltage AMP is not enough because it's for the commercial normal vessels. So we have to prepare for high voltage AMP in order to provide sufficient electricity for the charging of electric fueled ships. So this is something that we also have to prepare for. I believe that already the experts are talking about that, but let us build and combine our forces together so that we can facilitate the time for this infrastructure building. Also, the equipment for the energy efficiency improvement or energy saving devices. So there are a lot of demands and needs. Shipbuilders, from the very phase of design, they have to take into consideration these energy saving devices. As you know, nowadays we do have a lot of lightweight modules and materials, as well as the CCS, and so various equipments have to be considered when the shipbuilders come up with a design. So when shipbuilders build plan for developing eco ships, they have to think about how to secure eco-friendly marine equipment from early phases. Next is about digital twin. So in order to enhance the operation efficiency, we have to have digital twin-based ship operation, and for this, various technologies and equipment have to be developed, especially not just for hardware, but also for software. Uh, we need to develop technologies. So remote monitoring and remote control for vessels. Again, for this field, we have to focus on developing right equipment. So in the future, I believe that the marine equipment should be connected equipment. There are no such thing as unconnected marine equipment in the future. So the equipment manufacturers will continue to work hard, but I hope that the shipbuilders will also take this issue more seriously. And this is about the testing and demonstration. So this LNG demonstration facility is going to be established next year, and I hope that this infrastructure will be well utilized. And also we have to develop technology for demonstration and verification. And our institute will lead the efforts for this. Next is about standardization. So not just for domestic standardization, we have to lead the efforts of international standardization so that the Korean technology can be adopted as international standard. And for this, our institute is a private organization. So together with the public organization, we will continue to redouble our efforts. So that was a very brief summary of what have been done in marine equipment sector, and especially the message that I want to emphasize is that we have to build the win-win partnership with the shipbuilders in order to develop environment-friendly marine equipment.
Thank you. As we discuss the future, smart ships, and green hydrogen technology, I'd like to thank Dr. Jung Chul-bae of Co-Marine focused insightful presentation once again. As I listened to his presentation,
어떤 생각을 사실 답답했는데
I found some of my questions fully
여러분들 다
answered.
아시다시피
As
지금
you know all too well,
전 세계 친환경 선박의 최고
Korea is
선두주자로서
leading eco ship
엄청난 글로벌
in the world.
중재하는 역할을 지금 하고 있습니다. 일반적인 선박이
And
이제 이미
as for general vessels, well, Korea has lost its competitiveness, and the general vessels have lost their competitiveness in the shipping industry. The Korea has Korea started its history in the shipping and shipbuilding industry 50 years ago in order to lead the next 100 years. For Korea, it is important to lead the ship related technology, especially the parts and components as well.
새로운 그린
We should make a leap
뉴클리어
forward.
선박에서 친환경 선박을 정말 수주를 해서
Korea has successfully exported eco ships and green fuel
다른
ships.
선박들도
The
저소기차에
60% of the new build have been
받지 못하는
exported to overseas market. But as for the parts and components in the shipbuilding industry, we use only 30% of the locally produced and locally sourced parts and components.
국내 저소기차 업체 이런 부분들이
So the shipyard as well and the research centers, the academia, the government as well as the parts and components manufacturers in Korea are making various efforts for the demonstration of the competency of ship parts and components
저도 전
of
세계
Korea.
경험하면서 앞으로 그 그린 퓨전에서 여러 가지 연료가 다양해지면서
With the diversification of
전기의
fuels for ships,
가능하지만
LNG, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen will be fully utilized. But in terms of the economy and operational efficiencies, well, the hybrid fuel will be used quite actively as well.
연료 아모니아 수소
We talk easily about ammonia, methane, and hydrogen, but we will move in accordance with the global roadmap, and we should formulate our ways to respond to the global roadmap.
연구원에서 잘 캠프를 하려고 진행을 했습니다.
I'm so pleased to hear that Co-Marine is focusing on all these matters, and I'd like to appreciate his presentation sharing the future research direction as well. Our last speaker is Professor Kang-gi Lee of AVL. He will share with us his presentation on the era of net zero 2050 smart ships and the challenges of green hydrogen. The first step to building digital platform for hydrogen fueled ships. He came to Korea he planned to come to Korea during the Co-Marine conference, but then now he's joining us virtually. Please welcome him with a big hand. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction. I served as a professor of Korea Maritime and Ocean University, and now I am working for AVL. I'm very nice to see you all, and I'd like to congratulate on you on the hosting of World Ocean Forum 2021. I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this World Ocean Forum in the era of carbon neutrality. Well, I have listened to the various presentations and very informative and inspiring. I'm very pleased to hear all these new ideas and the plans. In line with the previous presentations, I'd like to talk about the actual testing result of the hydrogen fuel. So to introduce myself, currently I am working at AVL list GmbH. To briefly introduce what this organization does, we are located in Australia. We have about 11,000 um, mm, headcount, about 7,000 are researchers. Our focus is on the powertrain, power system, and digitization. And I'm here in charge of the high power system. What we focus on is ship, rail, railway, fuel cell, and the next generation transportation. To those things, the powertrain development and technological development. I also serve as the Vice President of the Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Strategic Council. Today, I'd like to talk about decarbonization in the context of greenhouse gas emissions. Many presenters already elaborated on hydrogen and hydrogen fuel. I'd like to talk a bit about characteristics of hydrogen fuel and the test results. And based on these two pillars, I'd like to talk about the step forward to open a digital platform. How to build a digital platform? I will take an example of the actual demonstration cases. I'd like to leave a message as a conclusion. So I don't need to talk about the rules and the regulations. The United States and China have declared their commitment to achieve carbon neutrality. So by 2030, the Korea aims to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by over 35%. This is the goal declared by the Korean government. So this is an international and a global campaign. Hydrogen energy does not contain any carbon, so this is a completely carbon-free and emission-free. What we need to focus on is the specific characteristics. We have to handle this very carefully. Otherwise, we might have some negative impact. So how to reduce those risks? This is the key area of focus for the researchers at ABL. Well, hydrogen does not contain any carbon at all, so there is no smoke, no visible smoke, and it does not create any particulate matter or other pollutants, such as polycyclical aromatic hydrocarbon. However, it has such a wide range of flammability limits. If the air contains 3 to 70% of hydrogen in a mixture, that it can turn into a flame. However, you need a very strong ignition energy. Otherwise, you cannot you cannot ignite. So this is a very two opposite sides. So it is very difficult to use this as a fuel. And as for this burning speed, it's extremely high flame speed. So it is 10 times faster than methane. So 300 centimeter per second as for the flame speed. So hydrogen is explosive gas, but when it comes to ignition, it requires a significant amount of energy. So it needs to burn this in a confined space, and it requires a very highly advanced technology. Since ignition and flame takes place very rapidly, most of the cases, well, it is involved in the stoichiometric reaction. So nitrogen and oxygen in the air would go into the stoichiometric combustion. So in the case, it will generate a very high amount of NOx. So the optimization of the burning, since this is a decarbonization, although there is no carbon-related pollutant, in this case, well, NOx can be generated. So we have to find ways to optimize the combustion. As you know, NOx can have negative impact on human body immediately. Then given these properties and the characteristics of hydrogen, how can we get and generate energy using internal combustion engine? And what kind of process takes place in order to reduce pollutants and then properly control the pollutant? We have conducted an experiment in 2 different units of engine. One is multiple cylinder engine, subscale and sub-level output, and the other one is a high output, large scale engine. We also conducted research on the combustion method and through the after processing of the combustion, we have conducted analysis of the reliability as well, and through this we designed this concept as well as the actual engine. As you know all too well, hydrogen has a very small particular size. That is why it can go to any places. That is why the safety and reliability of the material as well as the long-term reliability was the area of focus, and the durability, long-term durability. So these are the areas we reviewed in terms of the design in order to enhance the task accuracy. We also conducted calibration work. So this is our testing equipment. As reiterated by the previous presenters, hydrogen supply is not stable yet. That is why we use tank brewery for the loading and unloading. So one is used for fuel cell and the other one was used for the engine. And buffer tank was installed as well for the stable supply with 300 bar of pressure. Going forward, for the high output testing for a longer period of time, we are planning to introduce a liquid hydrogen-related storage facility. So this is the testing result I'd like to share with you. So method number 65 was used as the base. The hydrogen was mixed to this. So what kind of results is delivered by hydrogen? Here you can see 3 different results. First, 30% hydrogen mixed into natural gas. The next one is 80% hydrogen mixed into natural gas. And the third one is a completely hydrogen. When hydrogen accounts for 30%, and the carbon dioxide emission was down by 13%. When hydrogen content was 80%, then carbon emission went down by 52 to 54%. But here we could see derating, a significant derating. And when it's a completely hydrogen, no carbon emission. However, there was a very serious derating. In this case, how to prevent derating was became another area of focus in our research, how to prevent a drop in the output. Well, derating is translated into efficiency. So if efficiency is too low, then you have to use another source of energy. In this case, the total energy consumption would not be virtually the same. That is why it's quite critical for us to raise the level of output. So based on this knowledge and understanding of hydrogen, I'd like to turn to digitization or digitalization, how to create a digital platform. Director Pei put such an emphasis on the rules and regulations. Before recognizing that, I think we need to clarify the terminology here. Automation and auto is different, and digitization and digitalization are different. Turning analog into digital signals, this is what is called digitization. That's my definition. And using digitized information, you can perform a certain function, and this is what I define as digitalization. And if you can take advantage of digitalization to create completely new business concepts, then this is what I would dub as a digital transformation. Here you can design new modules, you can run a new tool, then that's the level of digital transformation. When we say digitization or digitalization in Korea, well, in Korean, the term turning into digital represents all these three things. So those who work on the rules and regulations, I'd like to ask them to clearly define what digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation means. Then what is the process of digitization looks like? What does it look like? Whether it's tangible or intangible, digitization turns everything into the digital format. We can take two different approaches. The first, you need an extensive amount of equipment. So you already have devices and equipment in order to work on the digital information. Well, I just took an example of a vessel. Well, the vessel has various equipment, digital equipment and devices, but a vessel itself is a certain tool, but there are various intangible data, so such as the level of contamination and so on. Well, these are intangible pieces of information. In this case, it is very difficult to turn them into digital information. So this is the list of the equipment which can turn such an information into digital information. I will not elaborate on this slide because of the time constraint, but anyway, if you can equip a vessel with these facilities and the devices, then you can probably turn analog information into digital information or intangible information into digital information. That's what digitization means. Then I'd like to move on to digitalization. Digitalization process itself is rather complicated as well. Most of the cases, there are three different categories. The first is how to create a system. So this is about the concept and design and optimization of the concept. And then setting various parameters which will go into the system. And the definition of those parameters would be included here as well. So this is about the concept and design. And the next one is the construction and integration of data. Well, here are various techniques. The most commonly used one is model-based control, such as MIL, SIL, and HIL. So how to put information to turn it into data. And the last one is operation. model-based condition monitoring would be the last stage of this operation, fully digitalized operation. Well, this equipment can utilize digitized information. It will digital information like optimization of the route or optimization of the functionalities on board or the maintenance of the equipment and devices. With model-based condition monitoring, you can do the optimal maintenance planning. So the last part or last category is operation for digitalization. But what we want to achieve in this session is integrated digital platform creation. That is why I'd like to take another example here. When we talk about the e-navigation, automated ship, autonomous ship, or smart ship, the typical process that would take place would look like this. First, you would do digitization, which will lead you to digitalization. Then you would need to create an interface. Then based on that interface, you can introduce various processes. And the processes would be diagnosed and analyzed through analytics. That's how you would come up with a solution. When we use hydrogen as a fuel, but that needs to be stored and supplied and burned. So for each module, what would take place would be quite different from what we have seen so far. So each module needs to be digitized and digitalized and then becoming smarter. Otherwise, it will not be possible for us to achieve this fully integrated digital platform. Let me start with the fuel supply unit. The fuel injection equipment. As the previous presenter mentioned, hydrogen has such a high energy density, so it requires such a huge volume. That is why such an information needs to be digitized and put on a smart platform. And the next piece would be the propulsion system. In the future, through the electrification, there will be multiple different propulsion systems. That is why these need to be integrated. And at the end of the day, well, this will determine the ship behavior, and even the ship behavior needs to be digitized and digitalized. Only then we can say that we have truly digital integrated platform. But this kind of thing cannot be done by any single organization or any single entity. Now is the time for Korea and for the technology leaders throughout the world to put together their collective wisdom to create a fully integrated platform. So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. This is the list of participants of open simulation platform pursued by DNB. DNB has focused on this initiative over the last 2 years. So when hydrogen becomes the mainstream fuel, we would need an open simulation platform or the fully integrated platform. So this is the thing we have to pursue at this stage. So this is my last slide. As you can see here, we have Hyundai Heavy Industries, Daman, and major Korean players, as well as the global players in the shipbuilding and the shipping industry. So, and we have several technology leaders and major manufacturers and the integrators. So all these parties are communicating with each other and interacting with each other to pursue collaboration. Only then, only based on such a collaboration and cooperation, that we will have a fully integrated processes and a platform. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
전체 마지막은 기회지만
So that was the last presentation
지금 오스트리아가 참석할
for
텐데
the session.
이 시간 내에 나와주셔서
And I would like to thank you
이천
all
이동 운수
for your
주요 문제
patience.
스마트 선박과 브레인스토 엔지니어에 대해서 발표를 해주신 이광기 교수님께
I would like to thank the
감사드립니다.
Vice President Lee Gang-gi,
마지막으로
who gave us very good presentation despite time difference.
사실 오늘 이광기 교수님께서 말씀드린 내용은
Vice President Lee,
어,
what he talked about today
포럼에서 발표했던
is something that
관련된 또 그린
is about
관련된 내용이었었는데
hydrogen and green deals that have been widely discussed so far in many venues.
앞으로 미래에 대비하는 기술들을
But as for the technologies, demonstration, utilizing hydrogen,
사용했을 때
or
우리가 효율을 어떻게 극대화할
how
것인지
to maximize efficiency when we actually utilize hydrogen.
디카보나이제이션,
Um,
그린하우스가스에 대한
these are not really widely discussed yet. So far, our discussion was mainly about decarbonization.
실제 가장 중요한 거는 지금 그런
So
수소나 연료를 사용했을 때
hydrogen and
어떻게
alternative
효율을
fuels,
극대화하고
when they're utilized, in
기술과
fact,
무엇인지
the most important thing is
상당히
how
중요한
to improve
사항이라는
efficiency and how to achieve
소소화를
high
진행했을 때 운영을 했을 때
output.
경제성에 대해서
Because economic viability is something that we have to take consideration very
또
seriously.
오늘 마지막에 다행히 우리 디지털라이제이션하고
And
커넥티드
also,
트랜스포테이션에
with
대해서
regards to
말씀을
the
주셨는데
digitalization and
연료에
connected and
대한
smart
최근에 그린 수소
uh,
연료에 대해서는
technology,
우리가 모두
so
다
he also dealt with
이게
this.
디지털화하지 않으면
And
우리는
without digitalization,
연소뿐만
we
아니라
cannot diversify
생태계
our
시스템
technologies
전반이
for fuels, propulsion system, as
렌트비
well
이런
as
모든
management.
부분들이
So all
디지털라이제이션을
these
하지
fields
않으면
require
모든
digitalization.
관계가 단순히
Digitalization is a
중요한
must.
것이다. 그래서 오늘 이런 부분에 대해서 또 한번 깊이
So
말씀해
again,
주신
regarding all this,
이강기 교수님께
Vice President Lee Gang-gi gave us very good presentation. I'm really thankful for his insightful
지금까지
presentation.
인터뷰에 발표를 해주신 교수님
So this will conclude the presentation session, and I would like to once again express my gratitude to all the speakers for their great presentations.
우리 토론자들과 함께 토론
Now,
시간을 갖게 되겠는데요.
we will move on to the discussion session,
발표한 탭이 약간 좀 지연돼서
and because we are slightly behind the schedule,
결제 세션을 모두 마치고 15분 정도의 휴식 시간이었는데 브레이크 타임은
we
10분
actually
단축을
had the
하고
schedule of 15-minute break, but we'll shorten that to 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes of break, we are going to have discussion session together with speakers as well as panelists.
브레이크 타임 10분
So
가지고
we'll have 10-minute break and see you soon. We have had the 6 presentations, and now we will move on to the discussion session with online and offline participants.
지금까지 발표했던 내용을 가지고
So based on the presentation
새로운
so far, we are going to invite the 3 panelists
기자의 6분과
for discussion,
분과 함께 앞으로 40분
and 6
시간
speakers will
토론을
also join,
하겠습니다. 우선
and the discussion
먼저
will take place for about 40 minutes.
토론을 하기 위해서 3분을 추가로 모셨습니다.
So we invited the 3 panelists for the discussion. The first panelist
산업기술평가관리원의
is from KEIT,
되겠습니다.
Mr. Yu Min-chul.
Please check the microphone. It doesn't work. We have some technical issue. I'd like to ask for your understanding. Due to some technical issue, interpretation is not being provided. I'd like to ask for your understanding. I'm sorry, there was some technical glitch. I am Min-chul Yu, a program director at the Korea Evaluation Institute of Industrial Technology. I'm in charge of national R&D planning in the field of shipbuilding and offshore platform technology.
그럼 두 번째로
The second panelist is Professor, Emeritus Professor Hwang Il-sun of Ulsan Science Technology University.
안녕하십니까. 저는
So good afternoon.
저승행 분야의 탄소 중립을
Currently, I am researching the small-scale reactor for shipbuilding solution, and thank you very much for inviting me. And the third panelist is from Korea Register, from the System Safety Team, Dr. Lee Sang-rae. So good afternoon again. I am working for Korea Register. Korea Register is registered as the performance assessment agency for wind power and RPS, as well as the floating offshore wind power and also the renewable energies. We are conducting researches on that. So for the discussion, once again, I would like to thank all the 3 panelists. This discussion is now taking place in hybrid format. So Vice President Lee Gang-gi of AVL is joining us online from Austria.
주시고 계십니다. 오늘 발제자로 모니카 알베스
And Monica Alvarez Cardozo
분께서는
from DNV,
좀 갑자기 몸이
the
좋지
speaker.
않아서
Because of her personal reason, she could not join us today.
6분 유병용
And the
송광영
Yu Byung-yong, Director of Hyundai Heavy Engineering,
박향영 부소장님
and also the Song Gang-hyun from Korea Register, and Kim Man-woo, Busan University Professor, Bae Jung-chul,
함께 해주신 이광기
President of the Korea Maritime Equipment Institute, will be
토론은
joining the presentation,
먼저
or rather the
발제자
discussion.
토론에 있어서 궁금하신 점을
So if you do have any questions,
댓글로 남겨주시면
please type in your question in the chatting window.
세션에서
Then at the end of the discussion session, we will open the floor. We will have the Q&A session.
유민철 한국산업기술평가관리원 PD님의 의견을
Now we will
먼저
first hear from Yu Min-chul from KEIT.
발제자
Then
댓글로 답변해주는 순서로
we will give the chance to the presenter to answer the questions.
As I listen to the presentations, I we came up with some ideas for questions.
그 계획비에
My question
그 제작되어져 있는
to
부분을
Ms. Monica Alvarez. I prepared some questions, but I believe some of the presenters might be able to address the questions here. Otherwise, I think about this. I can present my questions as food for thought.
그한 가지는 저희가 미래 이 친환경 사회라고 표현을 하면
When we talk about eco-friendly society, in the future, we frequently talk about green hydrogen and green ammonia and various energy demand. Each country has its own energy demand, and IEA also talks about the energy outlook, energy demand outlook in 30 years' time and 50 years' time.
이런 전망들을 좀 하고 있습니다. 그런 이 미래 에너지
But as for the future energy option,
얘기되고 있는데
what is discussed at the same time is the technological capabilities, how mature technology will be in order to realize the feasibility and economy of such an energy option.
얘기가 됩니다. 그래서 지금 오늘 발표하신 분들이 그중에 친환경
So the presenters today talk about ammonia
선박 관점에서
from the perspective of ships.
필요한 기술이나 얘기를 해주셨는데
The presenters talk about the technology and technological requirements we have to realize.
선박 관점에서 사용할
So from the perspective of ships,
전력은 있지만
there is some energy or the fuel requirement, but these energy and these fuels would be required by any other industry as well. So there is such a high demand for a limited energy, whether it's ammonia or hydrogen. There are some technical and technological challenges, especially when it comes to ammonia.
식당에서 전반적으로 많이 사용을 하게 될때
When we use it in high quantity, onshore, there are some challenges, including toxicity. The same goes true for ships as well on board. Another area of concern or the challenge is the odor. We have to acknowledge this because in a limited space, if we are to use this in a limited space of a factory or a ship, that this did not cause any controversy or any heated discussion on this matter. But if we use this in our day-to-day lives, how can you reduce the odor and how much it will cost for us to reduce the odor? So I'd like to know whether this kind of cost is incorporated into the price of ammonia. So since DNV is doing the comparative analysis of the future fuels, this is the question I planned and prepared for the speaker from DNV. Since Ms. Cartozo is not here, if there is anyone from the presenters who can answer this question, please. May I address the question? Yes, please. Not as the one who represents AVL, but as a member of the Greenhouse Gas Emission Reductions Strategy Committee. We have conducted a research on this matter for the past 2 years. So, as you just said in your question, we've looked carefully into this matter. When we consider a new energy option, we have to first introduce new rules and regulations. Currently, it's tank to wake. In this case, we cannot consider and calculate the costs associated with the associated and incurred through to the entire supply chain, but in this case, we have to check the well to will and a well to wake in order to make an apple-to-apple comparison. So, containing this, we've been prepared a position paper and then presented this to the regulatory body, responsible regulatory body. If we look only at the phenomenon of the energy, at the energy converter, the case in point would be the battery for automotive. Well, there has been no emission from the battery run automobile, but if you come all the way from the generation and the manufacturing of the battery, then you can see there is a huge carbon emission. So we have to raise the visibility. That's what we are focusing on. Since we are an NGO, there is no profit seeking through IMO or UN agencies. We will release and announce the research outcome. And with that, we would be able to see the cost base as well as the pricing for fuel options. Then fuel ship needs to meet three requirements. The first is safety, and since a huge volume would be consumed, the economy should be guaranteed, and the availability should be high because vessel would navigate through any waters. And third is low emission or zero emission. These three requirements to be met, we need to have a certain level of production volume. No matter how good a technology is, if it's not fully available in terms of the quality and quantity, then there is no way for us to have a strong ecosystem as well as the infrastructure. That is why we need to closely collaborate and cooperate with the relevant organizations and the parties in this ecosystem. In particular, the economy is related to the profitability as well as the life of a business. So we need to objectify this kind of figure. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Is there anyone who wants to jump in? I'm Byung Yu of HII. When we use ammonia as a fuel, toxicity and people's repulsion because of the odor would serve as the barriers to its market entry and penetration. That's my understanding of your question. In the carbon zero society, I do not believe there is one single energy or fuel. Ammonia is another type of hydrogen. I think, well, the question already answers itself because, like, when it can be properly controlled and ammonia can be properly used. But as for automotive, which is more accessible to people and to the day-to-day lives, ammonia might not be that widely used. Because first, the price. If we import ammonia and hydrogen, the economic analysis differs in terms of the result. But if you import ammonia and if you crack it into hydrogen, or if you import ammonia and use it as it is, and in two different scenarios, the price would change differently. So if it is cracked with hydrogen, then it might not be competitive enough in terms of the price against liquid hydrogen. If we can use ammonia as it is, then this can be used for the economic benefit. So in terms of the risk management, ammonia is better. So in the case, rather than using it for automotive, of course we can use it after hydrogen cracking, but even for the hydrogen, well, there are all different types of hydrogen, such as hydrogen byproduct. So in this case, well, we can use the green hydrogen for automotive and ammonia for power generation purpose. Thank you.
Moving on,
강일순 교수님께서
Professor Hwang Il-sun
말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
will please give us the comment.
감사합니다. 저는 오늘 이
Thank you.
수소에 대해서 많은 것을
I
배웠습니다.
actually learned a lot about hydrogen in this session,
해양 조성 산업이
and
수소와 소위
shipbuilding and marine industry
패러다임을 바꾸면서
is actually witnessing the paradigm shift in energy and massive wave of digitalization in order to have more secure, efficient operation and also to build global standards. I was very impressed by the presentations. I actually prepared a few slides in order to talk about the small module reactor based vessel development. So, to achieve carbon neutrality, I believe countries around the world have to engage in 30-year war, let's say. And the answer lies with the oceans. Norway produces the 100% electricity using hydrogen power. But I believe that we have to continue to explore ocean energy. So wind, solar, and also the uranium. You see that our next moving ground is ocean. So we have to extract the unlimited energy from the sea, because the uraniums in the oceans, they can be regenerated even after they are extracted. So it's virtually limitless. In the past, the nuclear power pursued the large scale for economic competitiveness, but in order to preserve the environment, currently there are efforts going on to produce small nuclear power modules. And plutonium does have a very long half-life, so even after 100,000 years down the road, it can still be utilized for a nuclear bomb, and therefore it has to be completely burned. And for this, the small-scale nuclear power reactor is the answer. So that's what it changed in the nuclear power sector today. This indicates the Industry 4.0 and COVID-19 and how they affect the shipbuilding industry and how they cause the so-called reshoring phenomenon in the shipbuilding industry. In other words, return to home base, especially the China and Russia are strong competitors of Korea. They are actually developing the floating offshore power plants, and China is also building infrastructure for this, and the US, Denmark, France, Italy, you see that they're all stepping up efforts to develop maritime nuclear power. And thankfully, the UNIST, CAPCO, and also some other organizations in Korea are also joining forces to develop the engines for maritime nuclear power. And every 5 years in nuclear power sector, we developed the plan for promotion, and we included the maritime nuclear power development in the plan. So for the next few years, we will focus on R&D, and the global acceptance is still minimal, and therefore we will focus on producing hydrogen using saline water, and also the imported ammonia can be utilized by nuclear power plant to produce hydrogen at a low cost. So by 2040, our goal is to establish legislation and develop the nuclear power fueled ship. But in military sector and the defense sector, you see that there are already the nuclear power fueled ships that are available. But the technology so far that we utilized is the light water system. Whereas in military application, what they use is heavy water system. But IAEA for nuclear control, the concentration limit threshold is 20%, and therefore the nuclear power merchant ships and commercial vessels, they have to replace nuclear fuels regularly. But in that process, there could be the accident of explosion and detonation. So Denmark currently developed the liquefied nuclear power system, but this is very susceptible to safety accident. And so it is pretty dangerous, but if you could use lead bismuth, then once you fill the nuclear fuel, it can be operated for decades. And this technology was developed for the first time in the world by UNIST. And currently, we are pursuing projects involving this technology. But what's problem is the legislation. As we experience the Chernobyl crisis as well as the Fukushima crisis, the IMO safety code is not revised, but this code has to be revised in order to commercialize innovative technology. And also, countries around the world should allow the entry of nuclear power fueled ships. So, I would say legislation is the most significant barrier. So, for that, I believe that we have to continue to make efforts so that we can give and we can earn trust from the public about the safety of nuclear power. Because Korea is poorly endowed with natural resources. That's why Korea was able to build strong nuclear power competency. And when it comes to shipbuilding industry, Korea is an undisputed leader in the world. Korea is very aggressive. And I believe that there is really a synergy between nuclear power and shipbuilding. And I believe the partnership is seriously required in order to achieve carbon neutrality. So if we could have solid partnership, I believe that this will contribute greatly to the achieving of our goals by 2050. And once again, it's my honor to be part of this auspicious panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After 2040, another fuel will be pondered and developed. And he also mentioned how to use this new alternative fuel for the maritime industry. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Lee of Korean Register for his question. Thank you. My question, I'd like to say that I'm totally in agreement with what Mr. Yu said and Mr. Kim said. Myself, I have researched renewable energy for the past 20 years. As the professor just mentioned, as I have worked on the renewable energy, I have confronted the dichotomous approach that the nuclear power generation is evil, while renewable energy is good. But such dichotomous approach is not right. That's what I have realized because the renewable energy can realize its full potential only when it works on top of um, fossil fuel, the nuclear power, and LNG.
집지가에 대기집지가 또 영향이 되는데 여러 해역수에 과부하
And
해제로 걸렸지만 97기가까지 올라왔어요.
well, we
그렇지만
have installed capacity of wind power.
국내에서는
As for Jeju Island, at the maximum level, the renewable energy's installed capacity, well, it can produce as much as 93 gigawatt.
그렇지만
Well, its usage is very low, but when it comes to Jeju Island, it uses only zero point 0.7 gigawatt.
1% 이하의
So it accounts for less than 1% of the energy mix of Korea.
4기가 이상의 풍력과
But
태양광
the
발전을
plan is to
이전에 안
um,
된 데도 전기를 들어가고
raise the
저희는
level to over 4 gigawatt. So it has excess electricity. So Jeju Island wants to use water electrolysis to generate hydrogen. But there is another problem. Jeju Island has no place to use and consume hydrogen. So production and consumption are mismatched here in Jeju Island.
지금까지 또한 내년에부터
So from next year onwards,
글로벌 클라이밋 말씀드리면 22년
from 2022, hydrogen law will be enacted.
현재 심재된 에너지는
As for um, renewable energy, there is RPS, and hydrogen will have its HPS. So power generator needs to use hydrogen for power generation. So from next year, HPS will be introduced. So there is an increasing demand of hydrogen. But while there is a rising demand, there is a limited supply. If electricity cost would be zero for water electrolysis, per kilogram in Gangwon, it's 14,000 Korean won. In Jeju, it will be 8,000 per kilogram. I don't think that really makes sense because hydrogen fueling stations, you can see whether you can recharge 1 kilogram by at 7,000 or 8,000 Korean won. So in that case, water electrolysis is not a viable option. So I believe as for hydrogen, we would need to import it. Hyundai Heavy Industry presenter shared with us various ideas. I think hydrogen I think we have a higher onshore demand for hydrogen than for the offshore. So I think the key here is how to import, how to bring hydrogen into Korea. So I'd like to ask for any kind of plan whether you have when it comes to importing hydrogen. Would you please address the question? Thank you for your question. The three panelists, there are two things in common. One is related to safety, the other is hydrogen production. So these are two common things we can see in the three questions. As for the safety, when we have an alternative fuel, I think, the key is economy and safety. Unless it is safe enough, then there is no way for you to use it, no matter how good its economy is. In case of LPG, the biggest concern was that since LPG is heavier than LNG, that might cause some suffocation. But that was successfully tackled through ventilation and other technology. So as for ammonia, as for the nuclear power generation, as for ammonia compared to methane, its ignition energy is very high, so it has very low risk of explosion, but it has such a concern over toxicity. That is why various safety measures need to be introduced. But if we have successfully introduced them, then we will be able to use them in a safer way. And many countries have came up with regulations when it comes to ammonia. And from next year onwards, there will be a revision of regulations regarding the use of ammonia as a ship fuel. As for nuclear power generation, the one is the propulsion using it, and the other is hydrogen generation using nuclear power. And as for propulsion, that is available only for military purpose, but not for international navigation. It needs to meet the requirements of the IMO. Since there are so many stakeholders involved, it would be very difficult to create any an agreement as to that. And it will take such a long time to create any such IMO code. But as for icebreakers, since they would navigate only within the national boundaries, in that case, it will be possible. If a subscale nuclear reactor is used in Korea, then since there is such a fluctuation of the offshore renewable power generation using offshore the power generation facility, then you can use it as MI has such a high level of safety as compared to the existing nuclear power generation. And since it is located in offshore places rather than onshore, then we can successfully address various complaints from the residents. Then what about the import of the hydrogen? So the generation of the renewable energy within Korea might not be enough. I'm sorry, the generation of hydrogen using renewable energy might not be enough. So we would have to import it through various elements of the portfolio. And we would have to identify various sources for the input. There should be a liquefaction plant, and there should be an ammonia carrier to carry the hydrogen to Korea. And there must be some downstream plant and still making facilities. So all these factors need to work in harmony in order for us to make a decision to import hydrogen in high quantity. So we have to take all this into consideration to come up with a balanced plan. That's the role to be played by the government as well as by the industry.
So thank you very much. Um, Director Yu, please keep your remarks short. So I believe that I think that you asked about the technology development plan for the liquefied hydrogen transportation. So you cannot really we don't really have to stick to liquefied hydrogen only. Ammonia can also be a solution. So ammonia right now we do have the solution, but for liquefied hydrogen, it's a kind of ready to made solution. So if there is a request from the shippers or the cargo owners, then we can develop the technology. So the speed of technological development, yes, that's important, but what's more important is with the market selection and demand. And if there are regulation and strong motivators, then maybe we can join forces together and facilitate the technological development. So thank you very much for the answer. We are now having very heated discussions, and we are also talking about new technologies and innovations. So we do have a lot of questions and comments to make. So far we have heard from the three panelists. If you do have more questions, then we'll entertain that from panelists first. And so regarding the hydrogen, there have been a lot of researches going on. And also during the research and the investigation phase, especially the advanced nations in Europe, including Norway, Germany, France, these advanced nations are financed, they are providing the financial assistance to conduct the basic research, and they also operate demonstrators, though in small scale. And so they are exploring these innovations at full speed. And Korea, we do have a lot of discussions and there are a lot of attempts. But the problem is that there is no significant, appropriate, adequate financial assistance for basic research. For materials, I think we do have more active discussion and programs going on. But I believe that these these aqua vessels should go large scale eventually, but there are no shipbuilders in Europe, so the shipbuilding needs to be taking place in Korea anyway. So in that sense, I believe that we should combine the basic technology that European countries have developed as well as Korea's shipbuilding expertise. I know that it's still too early, but maybe we can start discussions on how to promote partnership with European countries so that the whole countries around the world can move together in tandem globally and to conduct researches. I believe that this will benefit the welfare of human
예,
beings.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
앞서서 많은 분들이 의료적성이나
So many presenters and panelists talked about economy as well as safety.
그렇지만 우리가 앞으로 이런 친환경 선박 축제에
But
해탄소
in this
가스를 대비하는
era
시기에
of green ships and
많은
as we prepare for carbon neutrality
되게
by
됩니다.
2050,
경제성을
enormous investment would be required. Economy is very important in this regard. However, there are other areas of concern we have to take into consideration. That's why intergovernmental and between research organizations and between industries and among all those who are involved need to closely cooperate and coordinate with each other in order to come up with a tangible solution. It's almost time for us to close.
온라인에 질문이 많이 올라와
There are
있는데
many questions
그 접수를 하고
posted. Let me ask one of those questions posted
사실은
online.
친환경
The
선박
smart ship
방식도
and
모두
the
다
eco
스마트화돼
ships.
있고
This
디지털라이제이션도
is the
하고 있습니다.
direction we are moving
근데 이에
in.
따라서
But all
굉장히 빠른
ships
속도로
are
이게
going
진행되고
digital and
있는데
things will be
지금 몸값을
accelerated
하게 되고
when we do the remote operation and remote control.
디지털 컨트롤을 위해서
And through the
운영하는
digital
선박의
control,
개발을 실시간으로 할 수가 있고
satellite
진행되고
control of
그렇지만
ships will
우리가 이렇게
be
하기
done
위해서는
sooner or
많은
later.
노력을 사용하기
But
위해서는
in order to do this,
사이버
we
시큐리티가
would
굉장히 중요하고
also consider
현재
cybersecurity,
운항중인 선박의 해상법에 많은
especially
변화가
the rules and
이루어져야
regulations,
됩니다.
maritime rules and regulations need to be
그래서
updated and revised greatly.
아무래도 이제 기전이라든지 아까
So whether
말씀하셨던
it's parts and components or various systems which will be incorporated into the system, we would have to consider digitalization and digitization. So with regard to that,
이런 부분은 어떻게 연구를 하고 있고 어떻게
would you
생각하시는지
share with us the status of the research regarding these areas? Each speaker and presenter, you have only 1 minute. You made a very important point. So far, we said that the ships have been kidnapped in Malacca Strait by pirates, but these days hackers would kidnap and hijack the vessels going forward. That refers to the cyber hacking. That is why not just the connected equipment, but connected ships have been highlighted. The ships have been connected online all the time, 24/7, so it is exposed to any cyber attack. And autonomous operation system might malfunction, and the people on board might not be able to run the system inside the vessel anymore. That is why cybersecurity, especially for the vessels and for the equipment on board, is so important. And I recently heard that the Korea Maritime and Ocean University has created a cybersecurity department, has a plan to create a cybersecurity department. But even from the stage of manufacturing and designing parts and equipment, cybersecurity should be considered. Only then we can have heightened level of security for the entire vessel. As Professor Lee mentioned, so you have the whole piece by putting together the pieces. So when we talk about digital transformation, um, that's something we can realize only when each and every part of the vessel is digitalized. That is why, in that regard, we definitely need to have and incorporate the cybersecurity feature. Thank you.
시간이 많이 지난
So
관계로
because of the
여러분들께
time
질문을
constraint, we
드렸는데
actually wanted to give the
일정된 더
opportunity
시간을 추가로
to
허락하도록
Professor Yi for his
하겠고
comment,
또 오늘 어느
but
때보다도
maybe we could
어떤
not.
분의 열정적인 강의
So once again, I would like
자료와
to thank
최고의
the
교수로 또 모든
presenters
분께
and panelists
진심으로
for their
감사드립니다.
passionate participation,
온라인으로 함께 해주신 모든
and
분들께
also the
더욱
participants
감사드리고
online and offline. Thank you very much for your time.
어느 때보다도 2021년도 세계관 포럼의 조선 세션이
I believe
멋진
that the
훈련을
shipbuilding
잘
session
이끌었습니다.
of the
참석하신
2021 World Ocean Forum truly had a very rewarding and fruitful discussion.
진심으로
Thank you very much.
감사의 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 이것으로
With that,
오늘 조선 세션을
I would like to conclude the shipbuilding session. Thank you very much. So to become a shipbuilding maritime powerhouse, the presenters and the panelists gave us very good, thought-provoking presentations and also comments. This will conclude the second day of the World Ocean Forum. Tomorrow we will have another session and it's going to be broadcast via YouTube and official website.